Chris, thanks very much for joining us and letting us in your very brand new, freshly renovated office here.
Pleasure. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, appreciate your time. Done a little bit of research, but obviously I've got a few things I want to talk to you about today. But West Auckland man, Royal Navy. Did you watch the Warriors in the weekend? Up by one?
Up the Waz, by one, as
up
you say.
The Waz. Yeah. You're not a gambling man? You don't put money on them?
No, see, back in the day I used to occasionally bet, but usually against my own team. But the theory was if they lost, I've at least done okay on the way somewhere else.
But you're a super fan whether they win or lose,
yeah,
right?
Massively.
Okay, cool. No, that's good.
And by the way, it is our year.
Yeah, there we go.
Just to confirm that. Yeah, get that out there.
I know we've had a little bit of a chit chat just on sort of my background, bit of your stuff, but I've read some stuff on yours, and obviously you're an advocate for small business. I'm going to say the word common sense, and hopefully trimming costs and just calling a spade a spade. So I don't know, 2 seconds about me. Obviously my background has been residential building, residential quantity surveying, and then it was my twin brother fortunately gave me the heads up to reprice a set of stairs in Milford that cost $250,000.
Wow.
I've done a lot of precast work down in Queenstown for Dominion on the Kmart, and we were building 10-ton panels, 4.8 by whatever, 4 meters, huge. And we were spitting these things out in 2 days. So when I look at the labor cost of $250K, I'm thinking, there's no more than $1,000 here.
Amazing.
Repriced that, came in at 50 grand, and TikTok went viral overnight. So it's been kind of a natural progression of like innovation in a business, and you do one thing, it works, keep doing it. Anyway, interesting to come and talk to you, and I'd just love to get on some questions, but give us a bit of a rundown. What's been since you finished high school, how'd you get to here from high school?
Yeah, thanks for that. Can I just say, I'm really fascinated by your story.
Thanks, man.
From the point of view of you're starting up a business, you're making some smart decisions along the way. There's that word common sense again. Yeah. But also you're on the front line of all the kind of issues we're trying to solve from a policy point of view. Yeah. I'm looking forward to the chat.
No, appreciate it.
In terms of my own background, so high school out west, Kelston boys.
Nice.
Back
did
in
read
the day.
that.
Yeah. Hasn't held me back. No, just kidding. No, it really hasn't. And so I studied at Auckland University, studied there for 3 years, ran away to sea, so joined the Navy, spent a bit of time in the New Zealand Navy, then the Australian Navy, bit of time at sea on their vessels as well.
Have you fired a live round off any of these boats? Was that your forte?
Well, I was a navigating officer, so I had to get us into the position that we could then do the thing that we need to do.
Okay. Yeah. I just think that'd be a cool life experience. A live round off a ship or something.
Yeah. Well, the sort of dummy torpedoes are quite fun as well, but it's also quite stressful because you've got to track it all in. Anyway, that's a different podcast for another day. Another time. So did that for a while. Then came back to New Zealand, having been in Australia. Finished some study that I'd done beforehand but hadn't nailed, which was a law degree. Practiced law for a few years, including my own firm for a little while. Nice. Ahead of getting the opportunity to come to Parliament. Cool. So John Key stood down in my local electorate of roughly speaking, well, it was Helensville, northwest Auckland. Yeah. And got the opportunity to come here as a new MP. A few years later, got the opportunity to be Minister for Building Construction, which I really love. And here we are.
So do you get did someone push you into that? Did you see something pop up, or how did it come about?
It's a bit like a business that you could describe as an overnight success that you've been working 10 years for. I got lucky. I was in the right place at the right time to get that nomination for the Helensville electorate. But I'd had a few attempts previously along the way to try to get to Parliament, getting the nomination for my own party in other seats, which hadn't been successful. Then I ran 3 years prior in a seat that was harder for us to win.
I see.
So anyway, long story short, got joined up, got involved because I was interested, and then as I say, got a bit lucky from there.
Yeah, cool. Okay, I know we're tight for time today, so real keen to kind of get into a couple of key nuts and bolts. First one I've got here, building products. I've personally imported 2 shipments, 19mm form ply from China and 10mm gypsum board. Yeah. Made a shitload of money on the form ply, not as much money on the gypsum board.
Interesting, okay.
But one shipment I did prior to COVID, went really, really well. The other one was after. Got a massive delay of about 8 weeks at the ports. Anyway, didn't make money on that one, but good to give things a crack. What do you sort of see? How do we make building materials more competitive? How can we help the residential builder? And just step me through what this process has been like in regards of 250,000 new products you're looking at?
Yeah, up to. I mean, it's hard to know the exact number because it depends what's out there. It also depends what decisions we make at the granular level of exactly which overseas jurisdictions we're going to recognise. Roughly speaking, though, the clue's in what you said a minute ago, which is competitive. So the idea is that whereas at the moment you can only have products used in New Zealand that your local council signs off, and they tend to be quite conservative because they've got a lot of risk attached with doing that approval. And or it's jump through the hoops.
Can I just stop you there for a second? Do they actually take on a lot of risk though? Because if there's any issues, are they going to come to the party and say, "Oh, we signed that off. That's partly on us"?
Yeah, I mean, on some occasions they have, but the threat is that they will be required to. I mean, that depends whether the importer, supplier, building professional, whoever else in the food chain can be held responsible. And of course, when people say, "Oh, look, I've got nothing." And sometimes they genuinely don't. Sometimes they're just being a bit clever with how they're owning their assets or have their liabilities structured. So the councils can be on the hook as the last person standing. Yep. And from the point of view of the consumer, they want to go after the council because they've got the deep pocket. I mean, it's all the ratepayers, so it's spread out. But they know that the council can't run away, basically.
Yep.
So they are on the hook, and I think as a matter of fairness, but also just thinking about the incentives in the system that cause the delays because they're so risk averse, and that in the flow on effect in terms of cost, that's something we've got to get hold of. But in terms of the products, because they've got to sign those off themselves, or you jump through all the hoops of code mark, which takes a long period of time and a lot of money, you don't have that competition at the moment. So the idea is we've opened up to the world by saying we've passed legislation that says overseas jurisdictions that are comparable and credible, so equal high or higher standards to those in New Zealand, and similar enough to be compared in all the relevant ways, thinking about environmental conditions, seismic risk and other things that make New Zealand what it is as compared with other countries. And if those all line up, then we'll say you'll be able to use it as of right without jumping through all the hoops. So a lot more competition. Nice. That'll help with the pricing, and again, you're well aware of that. You're on the front line of all these issues.
Yeah, I see it all the time.
But also innovation. There's a whole world out there, right? And as for New Zealand suppliers and manufacturers, some of whom are doing great work and providing great materials here, if they can measure themselves against those overseas standards instead of New Zealand ones, suddenly they're much more export ready to the other bigger markets. So we think it's a win-win.
Yeah. You mentioned a keyword there, code mark. Can you just elaborate? I personally don't really know what that means. Time, how much does that cost? What does that process look like? And who does that stop? I could imagine that word stops a lot of people from even looking at getting into the market and importing something.
Yeah, right? Well, it is a big barrier because what you've got to do is get a product or a system signed off, if not by your local council. And you can imagine, by the way, if you're operating across New Zealand, you might be building at scale. You don't want to have to go to 66 different councils to get sign off every single time. Yeah. So there is a pathway you can get signed off, and then that's automatically deemed approved by the councils, and that's an outfit called Codemark.
Codemark, okay.
There's also brands who are the building research people, and technically their appraisals don't actually necessarily give you the right to have something signed off. So the whole thing's quite messy. As to costs, I mean, how long's a piece of string really?
Of course.
To be honest, so I mean, I don't want to be glib, but I can't put a dollar figure.
I know, it's with you.
But anecdotally, huge amounts. And the point is, if it costs too much and is too much of a delay to justify using this product that you've identified overseas might be better than the one you've been using, probably also from overseas, by the way, then you're just simply not going to do that. So you don't get the volume of import, you don't get that competitive price pressure, you don't get the resilience in the event of the supply shocks, and again, you don't get that innovation.
So with this getting passed, do you think it's likely that more smaller builders that are doing, say, up to 20 houses a year, they don't have to rely on the big 4 or 5 chains anymore? Like they can potentially start bringing in 40, 50% of their own stuff? Yeah,
I think so. I think they'll be able to bring in more off their own bat, but I also think the chains, if they're smart, they'll also stock products that are a broader range than they do currently. And I don't want to mention particular brand names, but you can imagine there are particular ones that currently have a measure of market dominance, and sometimes that's not anti-competitive behaviour in a way that the Commerce Commission would actually actively disapprove of, but it's just the reality. If we make it hard for people to bring stuff in, then ultimately there's an additional price that's paid on top of everything else.
Because I mean, Jib's obviously a massive one, eh? There's so many variances there. I mean, I don't know what I think we're paying $22 a sheet at the moment, or a builder's discount might get down to 18. But when you can get a container lot of gypsum landed, and you're getting it off through ports at $11 a sheet.
Yeah.
If you're doing 10,000 sheets a year, it's a lot of money.
Yeah, yeah.
70 grand. So.
Yeah, no, that's right. And obviously, I mean, again, I'll just talk in general terms.
For sure.
Plasterboard, there's a few different products out there, a few different brands. And if you think about, a particular shortage that took place, and it was a supply shock, and during the COVID times, you might remember it well, that was actually the spur for the Commerce Commission to say, we've got to open up. And so we're really responding to that. But if you think about as well the barriers that have existed until now, actually a change that we made recently, a couple of months ago, but I possibly haven't been good enough about talking to the world
Here's
about
your shot, man.
Yeah, all right, here we go. It's about having a building consent that specifies a particular product, but actually what we want to do is have it opened up so that you can specify, plasterboard product A and go, oh, well, actually I'm going to use B or C. It meets the same standards, and actually can make that change without having to go through either a formal variation process or a whole new building consent. Yeah. And again, when the cost and time outweigh that, you go, oh, bugger, we'll just use the same one that we've always used.
You wrote that, I think you had that in one of your articles where, an RFI can go back and it's 20 days and then it's $4,000 per dwelling if you're losing that time. And you imagine guys doing 100.
Yeah. Well, obviously a lot of extra time in the building process. I mean, some of it relates to products and materials such as we've been talking about, but also just general delays, lack of productivity, time equals cost. You can do the calculation, but certainly in a high interest rate environment, it's even worse, but there's never not a cost. And if you think about tradies who are desperate, particularly in a low activity environment such as we've had in the last few years, they want to get on with the job, get paid, get on to the next one, right? Which is the right way to approach it. So in terms of inspection timeframes, we've said 3 working days. It's got to be standard, 80% or more inspections within that time frame. Use remote visual inspections if you can. You've got to provide it, by the way, as an opportunity in terms of the technology. The councils have got to have that to be able to provide.
Do you think they're not up to date with technology and timeframes and how they're getting council inspections?
Well, the interesting thing is some are and some aren't. And
is there not like a one-off rule where it's like can a blanket rule semi-change and say, hey guys, we're seeing this problem across not all councils, 70%, as of this date, this is the process? Yeah,
well, I mean, that's exactly what we have done with the inspections thing. I mean, the interesting point there is actually the Building Act doesn't even refer to inspections. It just says you've got to provide a code compliance certificate if you've got a reasonable basis for doing so.
Wow.
So everyone thinks, well, of course we're going to do consent, so at certain key stages we can check that things have been done right and go to the next phase. And so on. So without that guidance and being specific, of course councils are going to go to the nth degree because they don't want to be seen as negligent. Again, it comes back to that liability they have. Sure. So, and in fairness, some of the quality of work is poor. Design or the actual workmanship building. Yeah. So, so all the incentives are wrong at the moment. The lack of direction has meant that we've ended up with this system. I honestly think no one's really particularly to blame. I know there's a lot of angst about the RFI that comes through on the 19th or the 20th days. A lot of cynicism, but the reality is if there's no reason for councils not to do that, then it's going to be a behaviour, at least by some of them.
Yep.
And going back to that point that it's some, but not all, we should have a single standard where we've got one building code, one interpretation, not a different thing depending on which side of the council boundary you are, and then everyone's got the confidence to move forward, get that productivity up through the scale. And if we can do that, through providing a single IT system, a portal which is the same wherever you go in the country, you've got that portability between them. And the thing we've consulted on recently, and we'll have to make a decision soon as a government, either to have regional kind of outfits rather than a single council. Deliberately, we draw lines on a map, or we allow them to consolidate voluntarily, and some of them are really out for that, which is great. Or we could have a single national building consent authority, which admittedly would take a lot of time and money to set up, but would get us to that very pure position of a single outfit making a single set of decisions for the whole country.
Builders are like super smart people. I find what they do on a day-to-day basis is literally insane. Sales, marketing, project management, council consents, forward planning, 4 to 6 months, finance, everything. My thing is I'm a very small fish in a big pond. I built 3 houses in the last 2 years.
Cool.
To go to get my final CCC, I got a lovely council inspector lady, comes in and pulls up on 3 very minor items. Wouldn't give me the practical completion. They don't have that process. It's straight code of compliance. The hold up on finance, the hold up on insurance, and the hold up to get a tenant in is super painful.
Yeah.
Like, I just think builders that have been in the game for, say, more than 5 or 10 years, never failed an inspection. Yeah. Sites are always tidy. Yeah. I reckon they should somewhat almost be removed from 80% of the inspections. maybe not 80%, maybe just a final
Have I got a deal for you?
Yeah.
This is exactly the philosophy that we want to get to. So there are some people who are doing a great job, great track record, high quality processes, no reason to doubt that they're doing the right thing by their customers. And, if you think about it from a commercial incentive point of view, of course they want to get it right.
Yeah.
And, for people who are prepared to say, well, if I do all the things that I know are needed, if I give satisfaction, I'm not going to be called upon. Yes, I'm happy to be responsible. I don't need the council looking over the shoulder.
Well, there's 20-year liabilities on it anyway.
Well, totally, exactly. And then you add in the guarantees that different associations offer, whether it's master builders or certified builders. Obviously, private insurance is available. You soon stack it up and go, well, actually, if we don't need to involve the councils because these guys are fine, councils can spend more of their time and energy and effort on the ones who are less experienced or less high quality or whatever, then that's a better risk proportionate approach for the system. So that's where we're going with what we're calling self-certification.
Very quickly on that, what do you think is that time frame to roll that out?
Well, basically anything we talk about today, I want to get rolled out before the next election.
Nice.
So basically 12 months from now, clock's ticking. And it takes up to a year to pass legislation because you want to have a select committee process of 6 months to give people a chance to have their views. Identify any shortfalls. Don't want to sit here in Wellington and have a great idea that actually isn't really practical in terms of the real world. So you've got to do that consultation well, and that does take a bit of time. And so for all these changes, working backwards from the middle of next year, I'm hoping they'll all be in place.
Nice.
So basically, in terms of some of these decisions, the big decisions that haven't yet been nailed around council liability and structure, next few months.
Nice.
But other than that, it's just basically been a rolling wall of stuff that we have been bringing out, and it's all sort of second half of this year, first half of next year.
I mean, there's pros and cons to everything. We were talking about this before. The cons are some people could potentially try and cheat the system down the track, but the amount of more productivity moving forward, builders can plan better. They know they're not going to get held up. I think that's a huge winner. So
I think overall, and I mean, I think the one thing that is worth being mindful of, yes, we need to protect the consumer. Absolutely, we'll have the safeguards in place for that. But we don't have a perfect system now.
No.
I do find it frustrating, but also kind of a bit amusing when I hear people say, oh, you can't do any changes. We've got this terrible system. Look at how poor the quality is. Don't you dare change it. I think that's why we need to change it. Put a bit of liability, put a bit of responsibility on the people who can be trusted to do it, and they'll be fine. And by the way, anyone who's not up to scratch, we should get rid of them. This
is a topic I'm super passionate about. I'm not sure how much time we've got, but as you see on my socials, I've been repricing a lot of stuff, and I'm getting a lot of roadblocks. But I'm a little bit different. I read every single comment and message, and the common theme I'm getting, there's a word that I don't like, and I don't know if you're allowed to touch on it, but commercially sensitive is a word that I don't know the legal term around it yet, but I'm finding it very hard to do my job properly and price apples with apples. For example, the Milford Stairs or Kāinga Ora stuff. I'll reprice a job, and I know I can build a house for 2,200 a square metre. Then I see an NZ Herald article, don't know if I can trust them, 22,000 a square metre. I do my reprice, I do the Legima request, do the 20 days. I get sent a 4 line items trade summary, and I reply back and say, hey, here's a QS report. This is what you should be given the rate and the taxpayer. What's your thoughts on commercially sensitive?
Well, you started by saying the word you weren't sure if you're allowed to say. I was worried there for a moment. But yeah, I mean, it's a tough one actually. I mean, in a democracy, if you're thinking about public money being spent, be it central government or local government, obviously you need that transparency. That's a matter of fairness and to avoid corruption and so on. But at the same time, because people are operating in the commercial world where they've got a right to be able to make contracts in a way that you would in a commercial environment and have some sensitivity around exactly what's changed hands. It is a bit of a tension, so I mean I'll be a bit disappointed if a Legoima or an OAA request didn't furnish the kind of information that you need to be comfortable. Well, I guess as a ratepayer and a taxpayer, but also obviously from your point of view, particularly interested in the breakdown. And
I engage with a lot of people online in that, and I'm all for a private business shouldn't have to show anything, because that's a private individual going out to the market, making a profit, working to put his name on the line, and then you just see these other councils or project stuff that goes ahead, it blows out 2 to 3, 4 times. Timeline delays. The people in the public don't want it to go ahead, yet it still goes ahead. And then we request the information to try and dig in, and we get roadblocked. And it's like doesn't feel right.
No, I get that. And I guess the other one that's a bit of a tension is in terms of procurement. For some stuff you just don't want to have all the hoops jumped through. For something that's relatively small, if someone who's done a good job before is able to do effectively repeatable job on the same or better price, you want the benefit of that scale, you want that relationship to hold. But if you're not doing a robust procurement process with public monies, then that's kind of not great either. So I think a sensible kind of balance in terms of what we require is probably the way to get that market discipline. And by the way, if I can just add one other one, which is the common bugbear in terms of small businesses that I talk to, when it's their local council or central government too, is that they bid for jobs, they don't get it. It goes to the big boys, big boys and girls, and then they'll end up getting the work anyway, but they'll do it under the steam of the prime, and end up they're just clipping the ticket, and it gets done by the local guys anyway, but without that without having the full relationship contractually with the procurer. So a bit uneasy about that as well.
What I would love to see, this is something we talk about all the time, but I think I'd love to understand the tender process more with say $100,000 rate or taxpayer funded project or 100 million, but I just want to know how the tender process works. Do you know how it works? Like, how did this office fit out work? Is one person in charge, a project manager, and they go out to their 3 big boy tenderers to put in tenders? Or does the project manager for this job have a sounding board or an independent cost breakdown to use against these 3? Or how does it work?
Yeah, I mean, different government agencies do it slightly differently. I know that Defence, for example, has got its own very specific set of procurements because there's international sensitivities. I think the procurement frameworks are available online if you would look it up. There's a government tendering service called
GETS. We do a lot of high-level tenders for guys on that.
Cool. The other thing I'd add is we're consulting at the moment as a government on what the procurement rules should be, and part of the focus has been around having fewer specific hoops that people have got to jump through, particularly small businesses and, like you said before, builders and other tradies who are doing everything. They're like great business people as well as actually doing the physical building. And we want to make it easier for them, not harder. And so just have a more general kind of test to say, if you can demonstrate there's good benefit for the local economy, it might be the employment and the work that you're doing, you might be partnering with others in the community to get jobs done, it might be local suppliers who you're working with. So that might be the way you demonstrate the value instead of having to jump through a whole heap of bureaucratic boxes. So we're consulting on that now. So if you've got strong views on how that should look, then for you or your listeners, really encourage them to get in touch with that.
I actually had a council member from, I won't name the council, but he actually reached out. He was a building inspector inside the council, and he said a job was awarded to a preferred contractor, which is another word that I'd like to get some more understanding on. I'm all for reducing risk for the tax and ratepayer. Like, if a job doesn't get done, if the preferred contractor has the right insurances, they've got a reputation, and say they've got a cash buffer to make sure you're not ripping people off. But this job had an additional $30,000 or $45,000 worth of P&Gs and travel costs on for this project. A local guy tendered for the project. He was cheaper. He lives in the community. His kids use this. But he didn't get awarded the project. And he went through all the correct criteria, and he still didn't get awarded the project. That to me kind of hurts, because it's like, there's 40 grand we could have saved straight away.
Totally.
You times that by how many projects a year? That's a lot of money.
Absolutely.
It's a lot of money.
And the principle of thing, if it's $40, not $40,000, it's still a principle at stake. So I mean, I can't account for that one particularly, but anecdotally at least you do hear that a bit. So I would just think transparency is the thing. I think panels or preferred suppliers or contractors is one thing, but you've got to have a way that people can get in and also out of that system. It can't be on trust forever, and you've got to have not a sort of a cosy club to which the rules of entry aren't known.
I think it'd just be nice to see more smaller guys, or guys that are operating 1 to 5 staff under 2 million, to get more of an opportunity to crack to do these bigger jobs, because tendering in the private sector is very, very competitive. But it seems as soon as you get into these cushy gigs, it just seems to be gravy train is the word that gets thrown around a lot.
Well, I mean, it won't be a silver bullet, but I think one helpful thing that will actually move in the right direction will be if we do more staged projects, and also use imagination as central government, but also local to carve off bits of the project. I've had roads in my area that have been quite big projects and have been done by the big sort of 4 or 5 that you can imagine, but actually side roads that feed in, literally sort of intersecting with the main project, done by local contractors who are sort of at that second tier. Bloody good at what they do, by the way. All the community benefit that is associated with that. And so they got something. They wouldn't have got the whole thing, but they got something, and that was good for them. And if you think about doing stages of projects, that's going to be better for the infrastructure pipeline. If you think massive hospitals versus lots of smaller primary health care services, you're not going to get 4 lanes between Auckland and Whangarei in one hit, but if you do it in stages, I mean, each of the stages, by the way, is big in itself, but so it's all relative, but by breaking things up from a government point of view, we'll probably have a better workflow for people who are, want the work to be able to stay in this country, but also that will, I think, put a thumb on the scale in favour of those who are, small to medium as opposed to just the big ones.
Yeah. Do you just want to give your piece or thoughts on infrastructure, subdivisions, land opening up for more houses?
Yeah, I mean, in short, we need more everywhere, and we need to go up and out. And so that work, which has really been led by Chris Bishop, is around...
but do you work quite closely with him on that?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, so, I mean, if you can imagine the natural connection between his work, which is resource management, so the availability of land, you can use it for a particular purpose, then someone's got to come on and do the building, design and obviously all the stages, which is me, so naturally a tie-in. And he has the housing portfolio as well, and obviously a tie-in in terms of what Kāinga Ora's doing to build the state houses or the public housing, not necessarily state housing, could be community housing providers. And obviously I'm interested to do what I can to help get those costs down, because that'll mean more of them, or alternatively the same number of houses but for less cost, which is going to be good for the taxpayer. Yeah.
Who's liable for that stuff? If stuff goes over budget, out of cost, how do we, because imagine how many peeved off people there are. And that's just one project out of how many around New Zealand. Yeah. I don't know if you have any speaks on that, but
I'm pleased to say I've got nothing to do with that project. Yeah. I mean, obviously I follow it, politically, and as a member of the government, I'm interested, of course, and of course for the people in New Zealand, Dunedin, as well as New Zealand more generally, we need to do this stuff better. I think the point is, over the years, successive governments of both political stripes, by the way, it's not a particularly partisan point sitting here in 2025 on the government benches finally. But I think, historically it's been the case that governments have come in and gone, no, we're not going to do those things that you guys were planning. We're going to do it, but we're going to do it a different way. And that's really unhelpful, obviously. Sometimes it's the right decision, by the way, and that's when you get to say, not only should the onus be on the opposition when they come into government not to cancel stuff willy-nilly,
which is already in, and we've already invested money and time into this
project. The sunk cost argument and sort of, you can weigh all that up. But also the onus is on the guys that are in government not to commit to done projects that we then going to expect the others to sign up to. So the solution has to be a 30-year infrastructure pipeline. I mean, you could say longer than 30, but it is 30 that we're putting together. And I say actually it's New Zealand Inc. It's the government of the day reaching across the aisle to the opposition, and I'm pleased to say they're picking up the ball and running with it. There'll always be disagreements around the margins about what the project should be, but to have a list where we say for the next 30 years, here are the key projects, there will be something. Don't pack up shop, go to Australia, keep the drilling machine in this country because we're going to have another tunnel for you somewhere. I mean, that's a very specific example, but and the next hospital, once we've finished Dunedin, might be here or it might be there, but there's going to be one, and we know that we've got something that people can rely on. Of course, it's a workforce issue as well, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, the last thing we want is to finally get to that high level of activity that I think we're going to get to. I'm really optimistic in terms of residential, but also commercial and infrastructure. And then go, well, we've got no workers, everyone's, headed off to Australia. Right, and a lot of, thing I always say is lots of, All Blacks jerseys and Warriors kit at building sites in Sydney and Melbourne and Brisbane should make our hearts sink, really, just because those are guys and girls who could be doing the
good stuff here. Back here, exactly.
Totally, and not a criticism of them, of course, they're going to
you've got to do what you've got to do, look after your family, get ahead.
Absolutely, of course, and people will make rational decisions in that regard, and over the last 4 or 5 years that's been the reality, but it'll be to our detriment as a country, as well as the opportunity for them to lost for them to bring up their kids in a Kiwi environment if they go and then we don't have them available. So that certainty of pipelines is important from that point of view as much as it is because we need the hospitals and the roads and the schools.
No, cool, good answer there. Final one from me. Our target market is literally just the residential builder, under 2 million in revenue every year. Most of them, 50%, 60%, are really struggling at the moment. They feel like it's hard to make money, it's competitive, stuff isn't going ahead. What's kind of some words of wisdom from you over the next 12 months? What can we expect in the industry?
Well, I don't know about words of wisdom, certainly words of encouragement. And from where I sit, it's a fine line you walk as a politician, especially in government. You want to be encouraging and optimistic, and I think we can and should be that, and I'll explain why I'm basing that on in a minute, but I also do want to acknowledge that it has been really tough for people. So people don't want to hear everything's in the garden is rosy. Actually, it has been bloody tough, and it's been a mental health crisis in many cases. Obviously, some people have upstick, and as we've discussed, and gone to Australia, or they've stayed in New Zealand and they're doing something else you know, and that might be a win for someone else, I don't know. But from the building point of view, we're gonna, you know, we've lost out basically.
Yeah.
So it has been tough. I think there are green shoots, as you know, economists and politicians are fond of saying. Reality is inflation was out of control, a lot of money printing, you know, associated with the COVID response. And, you know, we don't need to relitigate that today. And even assuming that was the perfect response at the time, here we are in 2025 with a high cost of living based on inflation. You know, interest rates went up high for that. That's now under control, so that's the good news. Interest rates coming back down, so we're in a better place, but that's been the dampening effect in terms of residential and actually other commercial projects too.
Yeah. Last one. Can you just give your talks just on the granny flat stuff? I think that's a huge pro. There'll be some cons with that, but that's a good move, do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly been really encouraged. Everyone seems really on board with the concept. Of course, the devil's in the detail, and people say, absolutely. Oh, well, we're happy with the idea, but we've got to get it right. It's got to be low risk. It's got to be trusted professionals. Absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, the legislation is drafted. You know, we're good to go in terms of getting that out into the real world. And so it'll be, you know, a matter of weeks or, you know, a few months.
And good on you for that, because I mean, I personally did too, and there's 12,000 to 15K worth of red tape fees there, and totally. 4 months waiting. So I think the amount of projects that are going to come out now, I think you put a number out there, but good job. So
I mean, you're always plucking a number out of thin air to some extent.
We price a lot of jobs, so I mean, you're probably right.
Oh, there we go. Well, I mean, you know, to some extent you're guessing, but we think it'll be significant. It's not a silver bullet. Again, none of the stuff is, but if we do a lot of little things right, and we prove a system where a low risk structure, single story, detached, up to 70 square metres, all the relevant people, LBPs, registered license, drainage,
I think you've done great there. There's another 140 to 250K $1,000 jobs that can go ahead straight away. So good job. I feel I've got eyes in the back of my head at the moment. So thanks very much, and I appreciate you making the time for me, man.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Keep up the good work.
Yeah, no, I'm enjoying it. Make sure you follow me on socials, please.
Absolutely, we'll do. We'll do.